अनिरोधमनुत्पादमनुच्छेदमशाश्वतम् अनेकार्थमनानार्थमनागममनिर्गमम् यः प्रतीत्यसमुत्पादं प्रपञ्चोपशमं शिवं देशयामास सम्बुद्धस्तं वन्दे वदताम्बरम् न स्वतो नापि परतो न द्वाभ्यां नाप्यहेतुतः उत्पन्ना जातु विद्यन्ते भावाः क्वचन केचन. Welcome back to our Dharmapada class. As always, I commend you for being so diligent in your attendance. The Buddha's teaching is all about insight into our original nature or our true nature, which has a liberative quality. The teaching is that our real being is like a mirror that has been covered in dust. It is already there. The real being is already there, just as the mirror is already there. All one needs to do is to remove that dust, to purify, to dissolve that dust, and then the splendor of the mirror will shine forth. This is a very well-known example, and sometimes those examples which are very well known become a little boring. Our real being is like a gold nugget that is covered in a crust of stone and other material substances. And when these are broken away, the gold nugget shines forth. Thus, it is important to understand that this real being is already there. It is not that we are creating something. When we speak of the Buddha's path to freedom, to liberation from negative states, from negative emotions, it is not that we are creating something that isn't already there as a potential, you see. It's very important to see that, because that allows us not to judge ourselves so much when we encounter these teachings about negative states. For instance, the teaching that negative emotions such as envy or conceit or greed by nature cause further negative states. Such a teaching can often be misunderstood and can lead to a sense of self-judging. Oh, I have these states, therefore I'm bad, you see? But that is not the teaching here, but it very often goes into that direction. And then we have this tendency for people to judge themselves, like extreme forms of the Catholic Church. I'm just taking it as an example. There are some extreme forms of the Catholic Church, extreme sects where they are flogging themselves, to get rid of desire. I'm sure you've heard of such things. And there is a tendency also in other religious traditions to go in that direction. So it's very important for me that I can convey this to you. That is not what we are teaching here. It is not that when you observe envy in yourself or you observe some negative state in yourself, that you add another negative state on top of that, meaning self-judgment, I'm bad, self-flogging and all that. if that is the result of all these teachings, then, sort of to put it humorously, then I will be in trouble when I die, in the sense that I will have severe negative karmic consequences of having conveyed something like that. You understand? Because it means that somehow I've made you unhappy by giving you a wrong view. You see, so I have a responsibility to convey this properly. That's why I keep talking about it again and again, even though some of you might think is very repetitive, but it is essential to understand. It is not about you getting into a mode of self-judgment. I'm so bad because I have all these states. Not at all. It is simply for you to realize that inherently a negative state of mind, such as conceit. Let us take conceit, smugness, is a very narrow state of mind, and that state of mind, by its nature, eventually produces some form of suffering, because it creates a pattern where with time there will be discontentment in you and in others, and that will lead to a dynamic where with time there will be suffering. And the Buddha's teaching is not only in this life, but with time also in next lives. See? So it is about understanding that these states by nature are problematic, and it is the supreme goal, the supreme purushartha of a human being, of our consciousness, to ultimately become free of such narrow states and to melt into the unconditional state of universal love, of universal compassion, of universal wisdom, which by nature is blissful, which by nature is joyful. And you can taste that yourself. A state where you feel love for all beings is by nature blissful. There cannot be, when you have that state, there cannot be a sense of, oh, I want this, I want that, and for myself only. I want respect. People should respect me. I should get acknowledgement from people because they should see that I love everybody. Right? That's not possible when you have a true sense of compassion and love for others. You see? The other is actually a form of conceit. You should respect me because I love you. Right? That makes no sense. So I just want to show you that this path is about insight. It is not about a dogma. It is not about giving you a rigid concept. It is about insight, that we personally, ourselves, put the teaching to a test and see, is it true that a strong conceit, subtle conceit, or strong irritation or aversion, or that these states, which are defined as kleshas, negative states, is it true that these give rise to negative states with time? Maybe not right away, but with time. Is it true? Let's put it to the test. Is it true that a state of where I'm blocking myself, where I'm looking at myself only, where I'm not open to beings, where I'm not open-hearted towards others, is it true that such a state actually by nature with time leads to narrowness, leads to constrictedness? Is it true? We can put it to the test, you see? And that is also what the Buddha said. He says, Atta Dipo Bhava, be a light unto yourself. Some people also translate the Dipo as Dvipa, be an island unto yourself, be your own light or be your own island. Don't, he says in one of the sutras, don't take it to be true because I said it. Put it to a test and see for yourself the difference between a state of universal maitri, unconditional acceptance, and its opposite, which is, it's all about me. And one can put it to the test And then one can see for oneself. And perhaps initially, when we put it to the test, it might seem that it's not true. No, I feel better when I hurt others or something like that. I don't know. It might be initially. And then if you are on the path of insight, then continue to put it to the test. See for a while, is it really true that when you go into a negative state of rage and all that, that you feel better later? Is it true? It is. I'm not sure. If when we put that to the test, really, genuinely, with real insight, I don't think we would come to the conclusion that a selfish, self-oriented, aversion-oriented state of mind produces any kind of contentment or peace or satisfaction. I haven't seen it. Please let me know if you have seen it. So now, having given you this introduction, we come to the chapter, which is actually the chapter 9. I'm sorry for giving a wrong number, not 8, but 9. And this chapter is really about negativity. That's the title of the chapter. So the Buddha says, one should be swift in engaging in virtue, and one should restrain the mind from negativity. The mind of one who is slow at engaging in virtues, in fact, tends towards negativity. I'll come back to this. Just repeat that last line. The mind of one who is slow at engaging in virtue tends towards negativity. If a person unintentionally engages in negativity, let them not do it again and again. Let them recognize and not repeat it. The accumulation of negativity leads to misery. If a person engages in virtue, let them do it again and again. The accumulation of virtue leads to joy. As long as the negative state has not ripened, the negative person may even see virtue in the negative actions. But when the fruits of that negative state ripens, then the negative person sees the nature of the negative actions. As long as the virtue has not ripened, a virtuous person may even see negativity in the virtuous actions. But when the fruit of the virtue ripens, then the virtuous person sees the nature of the virtuous actions. Do not ignore negative states thinking they will never return to me. The falling drops of water will fill up even a large jar, kumbha, eventually. The fool fills himself up with negativity, even if it seems that he is collecting just little by little. Wonderful statement. Toka tokam pi achinam. Even if one thinks just little by little, it's accumulating. Do not overlook virtue, thinking it will never return to me. The falling drops of water will fill up even a large jar. A wise person fills themselves up with virtue, even if it seems that they are collecting just little by little. It also accumulates. One should avoid negativity like a merchant with a small caravan and plenty of gold would avoid a dreadful path where there are bandits, or like someone who wants to live would avoid poison. Some are reborn in a human womb, in a human birth. Negative ones are reborn in negative conditions. The virtuous are reborn in virtuous conditions. And those who are free of all faults attain nirvana, liberation or peace. Neither in the sky, nor in the center of the ocean, nor by hiding in a cave in the mountains, is there any place in the world where one would escape the consequences of negative states. Neither in the sky, nor in the center of the ocean, nor by hiding in a cave in the mountains, is there any place in the world where one would escape death. So this is the end of the chapter. Very powerful. And especially the part about the accumulating factor. That you see, we are upset with someone once. Let's take maybe let's not say mother or father, that's too close, but let's say a relative or a friend or a partner, someone close. In Sanskrit, there's a beautiful word, bandhu, someone who is tied to us. How? Through some karma. And there's an initial upset. There's some irritation, some aversion. And our mind thinks it's nothing, it's just a little aversion. And then it adds on to that. And there's more again. And again more. Now you see, these little moments of aversion, they're not just individual by themselves. They don't just remain by themselves. They actually begin to accumulate. And because negative states, such as aversion, even though in that small context, one doesn't instantly see the pattern they generate. One doesn't instantly see the accumulation they generate. One thinks, oh, I was just angry. Now I'm no longer angry. You see, that is the trap. That is the trap. They actually accumulate. They leave a residue. And that begins to accumulate. And at some point, it just spills over. And at some point, if one has cultivated negative states over a certain period of time, even within one life, it's not just other lives. You don't even have to talk about other lives. Even within one life, and everyone is a little different. Some people, if they accumulate negative states just for 2-3 weeks, they suddenly feel the consequence so strongly. Sudden depression or a severe state of anxiety or something else. For some, it takes years to accumulate. So you see, there's not a fixed rule. We can't say it is just, you see it 6 months and you will see the consequence. It's not like that. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes it only takes weeks. But the consequence, that's what the Buddha is saying. The consequence, the vipaka, the fruition will occur. And that is what is the most important insight we can have. That we don't just ignore the negative. We don't just say, oh, no problem. Now I'm angry. And see, I didn't even say anything. See, I controlled my anger. Oh. But actually we are fuming inside. That is not the right way. It's also not about pushing away the anger or the aversion. You see, that is why it gets so subtle. That is why we talk about samsara. Samsara is like a prison almost. But But to describe it as a prison sort of is also very negative. Let's say it's a school. It's a place where we're learning. But it's a really difficult school because the bandhas, the ties we have, they so quickly lead to an accumulation of negative states. And those of you who are very young, you can't see this yet. Those who are young, they never see this. They think, oh, all these spiritual people, they're always talking about these things. It's only from a certain age that one really sees it. It is only, and again, I can't put a figure to it, let's say 35, 30, something like that. That's where it suddenly becomes vividly clear. And it's also interesting that the Buddha himself ventured upon the path at 29, right? There's this tipping point at 29 only. But then diligently, of course, diligently. That is why he achieved full enlightenment at 36, approximately. So it sometimes requires life experience or fortunate conditions that you meet somebody who, with their explanations, convinces you, or you read a book, or suddenly the right book comes into your hand, or some conditions, and that is what is called, in the Dharma, is called waking up. It's like there's a wake-up experience, where one wakes up and realizes, hold on, it is my own states which are producing my experience of life. But you see, this itself is not enough. The next step is to also see how entangled we are in these states. It is not so easy like some of the YouTube videos tell you that you are the master of your life and you produce it. It's not so easy. That is where practice comes in. I'm critical of these, motivational speakers that give off the impression, you just need to change your attitude and everything changes. That's just not true. You require lots of practice. Why do practitioners practice sometimes for 10 hours, 12 hours in retreats, like Adityaji talked about in the last retreat, about his retreat in northern Thailand? Why do practitioners of Dharma, serious Dharma traditions, spend 10 hours, 12 hours in, specific retreats if it's so easy? You see? Of course, the idea is not that you need in your normal life to be 10 hours a day. That would be a little unrealistic, and it's also not necessary. But I'm just asking the question, if it's so easy to just have a different attitude and then why do the Dharma practitioners spend 10, 12 hours in specific retreats? You see, you need to ask yourself this question. Some of you are disciples of Punita Acharya, a great yogi in Gujarat. Why did he practice for approximately 8 to 10 hours a day for 12 years? Why do you think? Is it just because he was bored? Or is it because he understood that's actually what is needed in order to then really gain the realization in the path that he was pursuing? You see? So I'm just giving you this taste a little bit so that you also realize that when you are suffering, when there is misery in you, which is the consequence of previous negative states and also negative actions of others, you see there's a huge web. Samsara is described as a web. And maybe Adityaji and myself, one day we can work on a picture to present this visually, how it is a web. It's not only your own negative states that produce this web, it's also those of others. That is why the Buddha explained that everything is interdependent. Everything is totally interdependent. Sometimes we can't even know, is it my negativity? Is it that of others? Who is bringing it about? But everyone is interlocked. So I can never say it is just the others. That's childish. Never. If I'm experiencing misery, it means part of it in me is hooked up with the others. There is a karma, there is a cause and effect that is bringing about the misery, the dukkha, the suffering. So if my father has mistreated me, I can't just blame my father. This is the Buddha's teaching. Remember at the very beginning of the Dharmapada, don't see yourself as a victim. Come out from the victim mentality. That is the first step to come out of misery. And it is such a powerful step, but it's also so difficult because we look up to our father. We look up to the authority figure, the parent. How could they have been like that? And that reinforces it, reinforces the pain, and so on. But in the Buddha's path, we don't do that. We take a step back and we realize there is an infinitely complex chain of cause and effect that really spills over into previous lives, previous existences. So, and I can understand that many modern people don't like to hear this from, this Dharma perspective. They want, in the modern world, we want to be able to blame our parents. That is why I am personally, this is just my personal opinion, I'm sometimes a little critical of modern, psychotherapy and modern psychology and all these things, unless they are connecting with Dharma instructions, which many are with time. Now, sort of in the recent 5 years, there's a contact, or 10 years, there's a contact with Dharma approaches. I'm a little critical because, you see, when we get into the blaming and into the victim mentality, we never come out of the problem. We actually come out of the problem by accepting cause and effect, by accepting that there is this infinitely complex web of cause and effect in which I am entangled, and this has produced the conditions that, let us say, my father has mistreated me in my perception, or perhaps also objectively. That these emotional conditions I am in, which in this life I am connecting with my father, these are the result of very, very complex connections of cause and effect, which in this life, looked at through this narrow window, seems to be just my father who has mistreated me, but in reality is much more complex. From the Dharma point of view, in a previous existence, I would have been the one causing pain to my father. It would have been reversed. Or, if it is a new condition and my father is causing pain to me, and if I am not giving up that negativity, if I don't dissolve it, then in the next life, I will be the one causing it to him. This is the Dharma view, you see. So, to understand the complexity of cause and effect, and to accept and to understand that negative states, by nature, even if they are justified, even if I have been mistreated, the negative state in me is my responsibility. That is the teaching of the Buddha. It is not that my father is not to blame. It is not that my mother is not to blame. It is not that my abuser is not to blame. No. They are to blame. But the negative state is my responsibility. And the Buddha teaches us the possibility of dissolving that negativity, that state, not only in the short run, but in the long run, through Maitri, through Karuna, through Mudita, through equanimity, unconditional acceptance, through meditation. Yes? Now let's go to some of the stories. This is a story related to the teaching about the ripening of the states, the ripening of virtue or negative states. There was a famous wealthy man in Shravasti known as Anatha Pindika, and other stories talk about him as well. And he was one of the big donors of the monks, one of the sponsors. He was supporting them. And he built this park, Jetavana, at great cost. And he was very, very humble. He would bring, every day he would bring medicine and food and flowers and incense. But at some point, because of this generosity of his, he actually became poor. He was giving so much, sometimes we overgive, and he became poor, or was not impoverished, but he was really losing his position. But because he was such a good practitioner, the tradition says that he was a srotapanna, someone who has entered the stream. I will later maybe explain what that means. He was not really shaken by that misfortune, and he continued in the same way. And now, of course, the story gets a little supernatural, as many of these stories do. One night, the Grihadevata, the deity or the spirit of his house or his family, which was in the Naga category. The Nagas are a type of beings that appear in the form of serpents or snakes. They're not snakes or serpents, but they take on that appearance, though they are connected with that. And they are often related to the prosperity of a place. So in the sort of Dharma traditions, also in India, we say that one should propitiate the Naga Devatas, and then one will have wealth and prosperity. One should propitiate these beings, and then they make sure that you are fine. So I've had some mysterious experiences, I have to admit. This is just now spontaneously occurring. I think I can say this, even though my guru always said, don't talk about your experiences, but now I'm doing it anyway. But this is just occurring spontaneously. When we were in northern Thailand, Tripuraji is a witness to this. We were at this place near Chiang Mai. We were with the children, and it's like a kind of canyon. And it looks very strange. So it's like a mini version of the Grand Canyon, but not so big, of course. But when you go down there, there is water there. And of course, the local Thai people, they are using that as a tourist spot. And you can rent a little boat, and then you can paddle out into that place. And you see, I'm a very long-term spiritual practitioner. From the age of 13, 14, I've been practicing. So then we are very sensitive to these beings, these presences. And suddenly, while we were out in this place, in this canyon, I really perceived a huge serpent-like presence. Huge. And I told Tibraji that, this place is belonging to a Naga. I think we shouldn't be here, really. And she's witness to this. So then we sort of quickly paddled back. And it's not that it wasn't a threatening presence. But it was there, clearly. And then when we went up to this little restaurant they had there, which we hadn't seen before. There was a little shrine to a Naga. And that confirms that this perception was not just some imagination. You see, this is the interesting part, that when it is confirmed externally, objectively, something that we couldn't have known, then it becomes so interesting. So I just want to give you this as an example, that these stories, you see that the Naga now appeared to Anathapindika. These stories are not just made up. These are not just superstitions of ancient times. This can still occur today as well. But in today's time, we are very sort of coarse in our perception. Tripuraji at that time said she liked the Naga, right? He was actually a nice Naga. He was not a bad one or something. So now in this story, what happens is that at night, the Naga spirit, which was part of this house of Anathapindika, he appeared to him and cautioned him, saying that Anathapindika, you're offering all your property away and to these monks, and you're not thinking about the future of your family and yourself. And that is why you're going to get poor. Therefore, you should reduce your charity and you should look after your business affairs again and get rich again. So this is interesting. The Naga was interested in his prosperity. So he was sort of cautioning him. But Anathapindika was so devoted to the monks and the nuns, and he was already a strong practitioner, that he, in his dream, he sort of told him to go away and he should leave the premises. And the Naga, who was attached to Anathapindika's family, had nowhere to go, so sort of was roaming the subtle world and came across Indra or Shakra, the king of the Devas. And the king of the Devas, Shakra or Indra, was very, very favorable towards the Buddha and explained to the Naga that in fact Anathapindika is right to do charity. He is right to be so generous. And that the Naga should do something good for Anathapindika. And now you see, the Naga is not a very high deity, so the Naga doesn't have this perception. But Shakra, Indra, has this perception, and he explained to him that from some previous business, there are 18 kilos of gold that some traders still owe Anathapindika. And there are another 18 kilos of gold that the Anathapindika's ancestors, some grandfather of his, had buried, and then it was forgotten. And another 18 kilos of gold, which don't belong to anyone, but are buried as a treasure somewhere. So, Shakra instructed the Naga to recover all this gold with his supernatural power and to make Anathapindika aware of it. And that this would be, and he said, having done so, you should ask for his forgiveness. You should apologize for what you were suggesting to him, meaning that he should stop his charity. And then the Naga did so, as instructed, and thus Anathapindika became very wealthy again. And thus, and then Anathapindika took this Naga along to the Buddha. And the Buddha told them both that this is an example of where the good deed, the previous good deed, ripens in the future. So one receives blessings with time in the future. But then, of course, the Buddha, being the teacher of the middle way, of no extremes, also said that the Naga is right and that Anathapindika should look after his own family and he should look after his business, because after all, it is because of his business that he is capable of being generous to the monks and nuns. And if Anathapindika no longer has any own resources, then he can also not support the monks and nuns, the practitioners. So there should be balance. Wonderful story. I was so delighted when I studied this story. So beautiful, especially because I had this experience, and many times later I had to think of that place we were at. And then there is another story that there was another merchant who was living in Savatthi, and his name was Mahadana, or maybe that was his title, because Mahadana means very wealthy. And on one occasion, the bandits, the robbers, who used to be highway robbers, they came to know that Mahadana would be traveling on a business trip with 500 carts loaded with valuable merchandise. And the robbers, they got news of this trip and went ahead to lie in wait for the caravan. But when the merchants stopped at the outskirts of the forest where the robbers were waiting for them, they sort of had a sense that there is some possible danger here. They realized that it is not such a safe place to continue. And instead of being greedy, Mahadana said, I don't feel good about this location. There seems to be no protection in place. It seems to be quite dangerous. Let's go back and we will take a different route. So they moved back, and thus the bandits couldn't rob them. And when the Buddha and his disciples came to know of this occurrence, the Buddha used this example in the teaching. One should avoid negativity like a merchant with a caravan and plenty of wealth would avoid a dreadful path, a dangerous path. So, in other words, to have foresight, to understand that the negative states, they rob us. They're like robbers that rob us of our contentment that is part of our nature. Can be seen sometimes, not always, in small children. If the conditions are right, small children, apart from the moments when they are hungry or when they need something, if the conditions are right, small children are by nature contented, happy, by nature playing, by nature curious, by nature cheerful, by nature excited. And I often see that when we practice deep spiritual practices, I'm not saying we become like children or we become childish. It is not like that. But our heart becomes more and more again like when we were children. I've seen that very often. I've also seen other practitioners say that in depth of meditation, when they manage to really just give up the negative states, when they manage to forgive, when they manage to embrace, at least within their heart, to embrace those who have hurt them, then it suddenly feels like when we were children. There's this sudden lightness there. And that feels so beautiful. And this is our birthright in a way. So it is our own negative states and the bitterness that we allow them to have. And the accumulation that he talked about. These strong patterns which make us think that the misery we undergo is really us, that this is really part of us, that this is now who we are. This happens to be the personality I am. This matters to be what I am, and now I just need to deal with it. But that's not true. That there is something in us that is always pure and that is always pristine and that is always full of contentment. That is there. It's there in us, and that can come back at any age. It can come back when we give up all the things around it, all these strong patterns, all these negative states around it. When we give them up, when we dissolve them again and again through practice, then this beautiful flower of contentment blossoms again. It blooms again in our heart. But it's already there. You don't have to create the flower. You just need to allow it to blossom. You need to allow it to sprout. You need to water it. You need to allow it to grow, and you need to remove all the dirt that is lying on top of it. There are some more stories, but let us go to the meditation. Last time I gave you a glimpse of other practices that exist, such as the jhana practices. And perhaps let us do that again, and guide you through it. This is a very specific practice that the Buddha himself taught. It can be found in the texts very precisely and was elaborated upon by great commentators and great practitioners over the centuries. This is known as the jhana practice, the first jhana. So by practicing this, one gradually enters the first jhana. There are 4 jhanas. Very difficult to reach the higher jhanas, but the first one can really be reached relatively easily if one does the method properly. So please relax. And you can close your eyes in this practice. Now in your body, locate a spot that by nature is pleasurable. For some people, this is the sort of the chest area or the navel area. For some people, this is the bottom of the spine, just the tip of the spine. For some people, it is the back side of the heart. Locate a place that is pleasurable when you actually pay attention to it. Just very sensitive little pleasure can be felt there, like some pleasurable sensation. And now you concentrate on that very strongly. If your mind goes away, you just bring it back to the actual pleasurable sensation again and again, and increase the pleasurable sensation with your concentration. Concentrate on it so much that it increases. Identify the pleasure again and again, again and again. And now, as you are identifying the pleasure, look to its nature. Look to its nature as joy. The pleasure is actually joy. And concentrate on that. Concentrate, concentrate. Expand that joy in your spot where you are concentrating on. If you lose the sense of the joy, come back to the pleasurable sensation and repeat. Now look at the nature of the joy. Concentrate on the joy, but without attachment to the joy, and look what is the joy really if you concentrate on it. Remember to increase your concentration, not to let it slide. And if it's sliding, you come back to the pleasurable sensation. Then again to the joy within it. And then to that which is within the joy. And now expand the pleasure and the joy and that which is within it. Expand it to suffuse, to pervade your whole body. So make the spot you're concentrating on, make it expand, and the pleasurable sensation should now pervade into other parts of your body. Concentrate, concentrate. Look to the nature of the joy. What is it really? Thus we finish and we dedicate the punya, the merit, to others. It's very auspicious to do so. Not to think we've just done this for ourselves. And would someone like to share how they experienced it? No obligation. Any questions?
Yes, just wanted to ask you about the example you gave before, say, between the father and the son. And I think that sort of relationship can apply to any relationship. The difficulty I have is, on the one hand, accepting whatever it is, and on the other, of allowing in my view, what may be adharma to continue. So how does one resolve this?
Now you see, no one said one should allow the adharma to continue. That's not what the teaching was. But one should accept that the misery or the suffering that has occurred is not only because of this specific cause that one can see, this very specific cause. All right, the father did this and this and this, and this is the effect. You see, that is a narrow view. Can you hear me? Yeah?
Not very clearly.
Not very clearly.
Not very clear.
Okay, hold on a moment. I don't know what is going wrong today, but what about now? You can hear me? Very strange. Better? Yeah? Okay. So, can you hear me? Yeah? Okay. So, the example is that, you see, it is not, that's why I started with it is not easy. You can't just say it is this or it is that. It is black and white. No, it is never black and white. The point there is not that one shouldn't act in defense of oneself or of others. The point is to see that the cause and effect chain in the web of cause and effect is extremely complex. So it is not a concrete situation. We're not pointing to a concrete situation where, let us say, a father is hitting their child, and then we say, oh, this is the karma of the previous life. And this is not what we're talking about. We're not, of course, at that moment, we are trying to help and we're trying to advise. We're talking about the built up, the accumulated negativities that we have in us in relation to past events, events that are not occurring right now. In events that are occurring right now, of course, we're always trying to help in the best possible way, in the way that is the most beneficial. Yes. But when it comes to things that happened in the past, that happened 20 years ago, or 15 years ago, or 10 years ago, Varshaji, if you contemplate it very rationally, you can't do anything about that. That which happened in the past, you can't do anything about it, even though it may have been adharma, or even though it was adharma. But so what you can't do anything about, and which caused you misery that continues now, which maybe causes aversion in you that continues now, those states are your responsibility. And it is a trap to remain in the mentality of the victim, but many people do so over many, many years, 10 years, 15, 20 years, sometimes a lifetime. I know somebody who is now very old, and the person is he's 80, and he's only talking about how mean his father was. So this is and the person is miserable. So this is a perfect example. If the person had practiced the dharma, practiced meditation at a very early point, and had begun to forgive this past and to include the maitri and karuna for the father, and the upeksha, the equanimity, and also the acceptance of one's own states, and dissolving these states, that person would not be as miserable now as they are. 100%. It is a fact. So you see, the teaching is not about accepting adharma. The teaching is about accepting the past and not allowing the residues of the past to continue producing new negative states, further negative states, further negative. This is what we're talking about. Yes? Thank you. And then just perhaps as a last point, someone says, you mentioned earlier about someone who has entered the stream, the Srotapanna. Yes, thank you for pointing this out. So in the early teachings of the Buddha, which of course were developed with time and became more detailed, and different branches and so on developed. But in the early teaching, the Buddha identified a point of spiritual awakening where someone would no longer fall back into the entanglements of the inner states. And that is what he called a Srotapanna, someone who has entered the stream. What stream? The stream towards full liberation, the stream towards full realization. So now, how do we distinguish this? We may have an understanding that aversion or conceit or certain states within us are, by nature narrow, and they are by nature miserable, and they by nature cause further misery. We may have a certain, theoretical understanding of that. And we may have a certain experience in meditation, but if we are not so diligent, or if we're not so really focused on full awakening, on full realization, on the path, if we just see it more, let us say, as a hobby, or perhaps we have a slightly distorted view, we think the purpose of this meditation is just to give me some peace and that's it, and then I go back and I'm good at my work and I want to live my life and I don't want to really fully awaken to realization, then the result of that will be that yes, there will be some peace, there might be some better understanding of oneself, but there is not really a disentanglement from the states. The states just continue to occur, and maybe one understands them a little better, one has some better, control perhaps, but it is not a real awakening. There is a benefit, no doubt, but it is not an awakening. But if we practice very deeply, if we really understand this is a path, it is a path has steps. Really, it's a path. It's not a hobby. When we understand this and we practice deeply and diligently and further and deeper, there comes a point, there really does, there comes a point, and it can't be put in words, but it's like an awakening. That's why the term awakening is used. It's like an awakening from a slumber where one realizes that these states, they actually don't have so much power over us. It's some strange mystery that yes, these states are there, but these states, they arise like waves and they go like waves. And that is the point. And of course, this has to become stable. One can also see this in good and deep states of meditation, but then one is not stable yet. But there comes a point when it is stable, when it is just clear and stable, and it's always, and it doesn't go away. That is called Srotapanna. And now, my dear, sometimes people who are not part of the tradition really, who don't have good teachers or gurus, or who are not part of the lineage, they sometimes think that's enlightenment. But actually it is Srotapatti. It's Srotapatti. It's not enlightenment. It is actually sort of the first entry point where one can say, yes, the person is beyond certain miseries, and yes, they have realized, and it's not just intellectual, it's really experienced, but it's not enlightenment. Enlightenment is something totally different. That is why it's important to have teachers. That's why it's important actually to have lineage and to have proper Dharma tradition, and not just, sort of as a hobby, because otherwise one will think, I'm enlightened. There are worse versions of it. People who are not even in Srotapanna, in Srotapatti, they have some glimpse of the true nature of consciousness or awareness, and they think that's enlightenment. That's the worst. And then they become YouTube gurus, and sometimes they have millions of followers, or thousands or hundreds of thousands. That's the worst. Yeah. From a point of view of serious practice, because then it's just, oh my goodness, misleading people also. Yeah. So Srotapatti is the first of, identified by the Buddha himself, the first of 4 stages that are irreversible. Srotapatti, Sakradagami, Anagami, and Arhat. Maybe the others I can explain at a different point. Wishing you all a wonderful weekend. Sorry for going beyond the time. Enjoy.